All right, we're looking ahead to UFC 275, and for that, I'm joined by Jason Burgos, an editor at Sportsnaut. Hey, Jason, how are you?
I'm fantastic and excited as always to be joined by you.
So let's break into a little bit of what fans can expect at a pay-per-view event that everybody's really excited about. And let's start with the light heavyweight title fight. Can you give us a breakdown, a preview of what to expect?
It's an interesting fight. I mean, it's Glover's first fight as a champion after winning the title from Jan Blachowicz last year. And he recently mentioned that it could be his second to last fight. He's thinking about hopefully defending this title and then having one more defense at Madison Square Garden to end his career. For Jiri Prochazka, it's, his big first opportunity at a UFC title. He's a former Risen champion. It's a classic clash of age versus youth. Glover is 42, Jiri is 29, and it really is, to me, a fight that boils down to speed. And often in the fight game, even in most sports, speed kills, and Jiri has that. Where there is an advantage for Glover is that, without doubt, he's 42. He's been around a very, very long time. He has experience. He has that more technical acumen. He's more sound. He's more structurally and his fundamentals better, because Yuri's so good because he's pretty much a wild man. He's very unpredictable. You never know what's coming from him. And in that case, while he does have speed advantages and could make easy work of Glover, if he has that wildness and he leaves openings, that could be an opportunity for Glover to really surprise, because Glover is not the favorite in this fight. He's going in the underdog by a solid amount because of Prochazka's ability to finish fights and speed. If I had to pick one, I'd probably go Prochazka. But if you're betting, Glover is a very live underdog in this fight.
How much does experience actually matter in a sport that's as physical as this one? You mentioned the speed, the physicality. Does having that time really pay off?
It does, especially in a big fight like this. It's a 5-round fight because it's a title fight. Talking to fighters for so many years and stuff like that, there's so many little intricate things that are huge, especially say with like energy conservation, like just maybe if a moment comes up where you might be able to finish, that natural kind of bloodlust comes up, and that ability to control that, like to understand, okay, maybe this guy's not as hurt as I thought. Maybe I need to just be patient, be measured. Those little things on the ground. This is a fight where probably Glover needs to take it to the ground, using your energy a certain way, making certain setting traps, all those various things that only come with experience, and especially high level experience. Glover has been in the UFC, I think, more than a decade now, and that really matters for all sports. When you're competing against the best for a long amount of time, those little things, those little moments that really matter, that only come with having done it for a long time.
What do you see as the key factors in this women's flyweight title matchup?
It's a fight. It's tough when it comes to Valentina. She really is one of the best fighters on the planet. She is as complete a fighter as there is in MMA. With Talia Santos, she has an opportunity. She is a very good fighter. She is a good fighter that is on the rise. She has good wins in being Joanne Wood, Roxanne Modafferi. In this fight, she really kind of needs to get us to the ground, but it's not like Valentina Shevchenko isn't fantastic on the ground too. She's outstanding, but if there is an avenue for Talia to win, it's gonna have to be taken to the ground, because with Valentina, she is one of the elite strikers. She's just too fundamentally sound, too fast, too technical, just too good. So if there is a way for this big underdog to win, it would probably be on the mat. And perfect example, she's had to grapple with Roxanne Modafferi, great grappler. Jillian Robertson, another fantastic, arguably maybe the best grappler in the division, and she went to the mat with her and out-grappled her and was better than her. So while Valentina is very complete, can do everything, Tyler's gone to the ground with very good fighters, maybe better grapplers, and done well. So there is an opening where it felt like maybe in her fights against Caitlin Chukagian and Lauren Murphy, like, it didn't seem like there was a clear avenue for victory. Santos kind of has that, and that's why she has an opportunity, despite being a massive underdog.
So you do think that this particular fight could be a little bit more competitive than a lot of people are saying it will be?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, nothing against Lauren Murphy, talented, Caitlin Chukagian, talented, but both of them didn't feel like they had that maybe something extra, that finishing ability, maybe a higher level of athleticism, because Lauren Murphy, good fighter, but she was a fighter that's she had peaked later in her career. It took her time and going through various things, but she is at an age where maybe she's not at her athletic peak. While Katlyn Chookagian, very good fighter, technically sound, but doesn't have like big power or submission, high level submission. So she's not like a threat at any moment. Where Talia has that ability. She's shown some solid pop in her hand. She's shown some high level finishing. She has those skills that you can't underestimate. And in a sport like MMA, it really is about the little inches where you make a certain mistake and you get finished like that. And Talia has that ability that Valentina's last two opponents really didn't have.
What else gets you excited about the 275 card?
I mean, it's a good depth-filled card. I mean, and that's the case with a lot of the UFC's pay-per-views. The pay-per-views are far better than the fight night cards. I mean, the fight night cards, due to the fact that its content is king and they want to put out so many cards for ESPN, some of the fight night cards aren't very strong, but the pay-per-view has some really good solid fights. You have some talented fighters like Andre Fiallo versus Jake Matthews. Interesting fight because Andre Fiallo's become this fighter that has developed a reputation as like an exciting fighter. He's gotten finished in his last two. Minelle Cap versus Bontron at flyweight. That's an interesting fight because Minelle Cap, another like Jiri Prochazka, risen star, is after having a rough start to his UFC career, has really started to get it along, come along and do some things. But they're solid fights. But I think honestly, beyond the title fight itself, Valentina's fight with Talia, and then Weili, Zhang, and Joanna, maybe that's the fight everybody is looking forward to on the UFC 275 card.
And why do you say that? Why do you think everybody's really looking forward to this matchup in particular?
It's a fight, their first fight. That was one of the best fights I've ever seen. And without best female combat sports fight ever, but just in general, that was a fight of the year for that year. It was just unbelievable, just relentless, brutal. It's going to go down in history as the fight where Joanna had the giant hematoma on her head and she was looking like Quasimodo. It was that wildness of that kind of fight. It was, and not beyond just being a brutal and physically, violent fight. It was high level. These are two elite, high level fighters, strikers, pound for pound level talents. So it was amazing to see the level of skill match with a high level of brutality. And it's going to be hard to kind of live up to that standard that they set from that first fight.
When you deliver in both of those lanes, when you have the, for lack of a better word, brutality, physicality, that added element that so many fans of this sport want, with some of the precision and the skills and the raw natural talent. I mean, for fans who are really looking forward to 275, is that essentially a perfect mix when those two things are balanced?
Yeah, and I think that's why. I mean, it could very well happen in the main event, but I think that's why that particular fight is the one a lot of people are looking forward to, because it is that. These are two experienced fighters that they have gone into fights and have really hard fought fights and violent fights, but they're elite. These are two of the best female flyweights in the world, just in general, pound for pound level fighters and stuff like that. The only issue for me is because of Joanna's hiatus. I mean, she's been away from the sport. She's almost over 2 years now by the time she returns for this fight. What kind of fighter will she be? There's some people that believe in ring rust. There's some people that think it's nonsense, and if you're training often, you can beat that kind of stuff. But it's still a factor because she has had a lot of mileage on her career. She's been around a long time. She's getting older in age. Those are factors for any kind of high-level athlete. So that's probably the biggest thing going into this fight for me, and why the standard of the original fight will be so hard to match, because you can't maybe expect elite level fighting out of Joanna after so long away. 2.5 years is a long time to be away from fight sports. Because
despite how much you train for a sport like this, is there anything that can replicate actually being there in the moment in a competitive atmosphere like this? I mean, where do you kind of stand on whether or not the ring rust will be there?
For a long time, before I really got into the sport and started interviewing fighters and managers and coaches and everything, I believed in the ring rust. It made sense. You're away from doing something, like you said, at the highest level. You can't replicate it. So if you're away from it for so long, it's hard to jump right into high level action and be good. But from what I've seen from fighters, what they've said, especially Dominic Cruz is a perfect example. He's a guy that's had long breaks in between fights, came back and was spectacular and outstanding. from what I've learned, if you're constantly training and you're trying to progress and you're trying to get better, you can kind of beat ring rust. And it kind of shows ring rust isn't necessarily you got to be away from a long time. It's just that if you're away from training a long time. So if you're there, you're constantly training, putting high level, that's what makes MMA so different, is that the training is very physical, very brutal. It's hard on the body. If you're in there doing it on a constant level, I think you can get around with it. But for her, for people that have followed Joanna's, last couple of years, she's been developing a life away from MMA. That's part of why she hasn't been around. She's kind of hasn't had to miss MMA. She's developing businesses and careers away from fighting. So I'm not sure how often, she's in fantastic shape and she's probably training, but it's a difference when you're constantly in the gym to where you're in the gym, you do it for fun, you're in shape, but you have a life, you have things that you're doing outside. So that's why I'm unsure of what fighter will come back, because it hasn't been 2.5 years where she's constantly training, doing things. It's been 2.5 years where she's kind of developing her post UFC life.
Mm-hmm. Every time we talk to you, Jason, I feel like Conor McGregor is targeting somebody, and there's words that are being exchanged.
Or the other way. Yeah, everybody's targeting him.
Walk us through what the latest is and where the latest war of words is coming from.
It's the big story now with possible Conor McGregor fights is Jorge Masvidal, and that's probably the fight that really makes, honestly, the most sense for both of them at this juncture in their career. Conor has made it clear. He made it clear earlier this year. He's bulked up, put on muscle. He'd rather fight a welterweight. His days as being a 155-pound fighter are probably over. Jorge Masvidal is a guy who was a lightweight for a long time, but has become a superstar as being a welterweight. So at least on that level, while people have mentioned fights with Michael Chandler, Justin Gaethje, those are guys that are relevant lightweights right now. So them moving up to welterweight is almost more like an event fight where they're going out of their norms. Where in Jorge Masvidal, this is a guy who's been a welterweight for a while now. He's fought for the title 2 times. So it makes sense just on a relevancy level for that division if Conor wants to be a welterweight full time. On a competitive level, Jorge's lost 3 in a row. He's still a very good fighter, but probably isn't a title contender anymore. For Conor, he's lost 3 out of 4. He needs a win. So this is a fight for Conor because the money for the UFC long-term is in Conor more than Jorge, who's coming up on 40. This is a fight where it's an exciting fight. It's not a grappler. It's a guy who's maybe is in an age-based decline, so it might be a good matchup for Conor at this point. And if he beats a Jorge Masvidal, man, he jumps right back into relevancy. Even if Jorge Masvidal, it's a 4th straight loss, Masvidal's name is so big that a win over him still is going to matter. It's Conor McGregor. Heck, we've been talking about Conor McGregor might jump into a title fight with like a Charles Oliveira just because he is who he is. So if he can do that with his brand name and beat a Jorge Masvidal and decisively, because he is who he is, he jumps right back into the front of everything. And it just makes the most sense for both of them because there's a lot to gain for Jorge if he knocks out Conor McGregor.
Despite the fact that this isn't a division that McGregor is as familiar with as a Jorge Masvidal, is this a no-brainer decision for McGregor to try to take this fight and set up this fight? Like you said, to the payoff, the upside is really big.
It makes sense. Like if Conor didn't want to be a welterweight and they wanted to make this fight, I'd still be very much for it. It makes a lot of sense in terms of the fighters they are, their fame. These are 2 of the more famous fighters, the more bankable box office fighters in the UFC. But long term, I think honestly going up to welterweight is an absolutely terrible move for Conor McGregor. He is only doing this because he doesn't want to cut weight, and that's not a bad thing at all. And there's fighters that have, instead of maybe cutting to a weight most fighters would normally be at for their size, they haven't cut the weight and it's been beneficial for them. But there's also some fighters that cutting weight and being at a certain weight compared to their competition, it's their optimal weight. A perfect example was a guy like BJ Penn. BJ Penn tried to do welterweight, tried to do featherweight. He was always an optimal lightweight. And for some reason, he just didn't want to fight there enough. Conor's probably an optimal lightweight. There could be a case made that he might be even a better featherweight. He never lost a featherweight in the UFC. He was knocking everybody out at featherweight in the UFC, knocked Jose Aldo out like in 15 seconds. So the fact that he's going up to welterweight and thinking about finding Kamaru Usman and some of these guys that are really sizable at welterweight, it's probably not the best idea for him, especially because of what his record has been and where he's coming off of 2 losses and coming off of a catastrophic injury in his last loss.
Is it really just a situation where he just doesn't want to put the time, effort, energy into making sure that he can make weight at the classes where he's traditionally had more success in? I mean, don't get me wrong. It seems to be from the outside really, really tough to stay committed in that way and to stay in peak physical condition, especially if it's a weight outside your quote unquote normal range. But, is that ultimately what this boils down to, and him seeking a different challenge, is that he's kind of tired of all that comes with trying to stay in those classes?
For a fighter that has reached such a high level as him, been a champion, and it's a common problem we saw with George St. Pierre and a lot of fighters, it's about motivation. Like when you've reached the mountaintop maybe multiple times, and especially a case like Conor, he's been a champion in 2 divisions, it becomes a question of motivation. He's not motivated to better his life in terms of he already has. He's one of the richest athletes on the planet. So it's not even like that hunger where, I'm trying to feed my family, trying to make a better life for myself. He has that. I'm trying to be hungry to be a champion. He's done that. So it becomes a tougher thing where it's about motivation. And one of the hardest parts of any fight camp is cutting weight. And for some fighters, that's a sizable portion of it in the beginning stage. For Conor, he's always in fantastic shape, but that's why I think he's throwing out ideas of title fights right away, because he's not motivated by fighting necessarily the 3rd or 4th best guy in a given division. He wants the very best. So not only is it to be about motivating and fighting the best, he doesn't necessarily want to go through those tougher parts of a fight camp. Like if he's going to do this, which he doesn't need to, he wants to enjoy every moment. He wants to eat whatever he can want while still being in good shape and fantastic shape compared to a normal person. But it's just all about motivation and trying and enjoying what can be a very harsh and difficult thing to do as a professional fighter.
Let's end with Nate Diaz, who wants a fight, is asking UFC for a fight in July. Who do you ultimately see for an opponent there? And is this something that's going to happen that we're going to see this summer?
It's a tough one because a lot of the fighters, because Nate, that's talked about optimal weight. Optimal weight for Nate Diaz would be lightweight. And he wants to fight at welterweight. Also, same thing, just the cutting weight. Motivation. He wants to enjoy fight camps, doesn't want to hate it and make it a suffering. So he doesn't want to fight at probably his optimal weight. But a lot of the fighters at welterweight at the top are booked, or maybe Nate isn't really deserving of such a fight. So in that case, because of that, the fighters that make the most sense, if he gets a fight in July, at this point, it's been proven the UFC are going to do what the UFC wants. They're not going to, while they should, hook Nate up with his last fight and send him on his way. He's put in more than enough work in the UFC and helped build the brand. He should be deserving of almost like how a player on a team, they want to be traded to a contender. That team, after years of service, will send him on. The UFC is going to do what's in their best interest, unfortunately, and they will probably set him up for a fight when they feel it's right with the fighter they want him to fight. The fighter they want him to fight is Khamzat Chimaev, and it's been like that all year. The funny thing is Khamzat has kind of surpassed that, where he doesn't really need a Nate Diaz fight to build his relevancy. But if we're just going with big fights, if we're just going with that idea, beating Nate and crushing him, which like he probably will do, still helps build his brand. And he's a guy that could be a superstar for them for the next 10 years. Outside of that, the most logical fights, since we were talking about Jorge, would be a rematch of the BMF title fight. That would make sense. That would be a fight I think a lot of people would still want to watch, especially since the first one ended up on a doctor stoppage for a cut. I was there. It was an amazing fight until it ended. And then Stephen Thompson would be another option in that. He's a name at welterweight. He was a former title contender, but he's lost a few, so he's a little bit down in the pecking order. And that would be an interesting styles clash of Nate's ultra aggressive pushing for boxing versus Stephen Thompson's kind of karate defensive based kind of idea and stuff like that. But outside of that, he doesn't have a lot of options, and he really doesn't have the leverage he should, unfortunately, to be able to escape the UFC like he really wants to.
Jason Burgos, great stuff as always. Thorough preview of UFC 275 and some other relevant headlines in the sport as well. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.